Ladies and gentlemen, the constitutional overreaches that we have seen in the past 2 years have been truly a sight to see. It's been sad. It's a very sad thing that we've seen. We could go on and on about the things that we've seen, such as the COVID lockdowns or churches shutting down. It's been a problem, and it will continue to be a problem if we don't stop it. And so, what we are doing today is actually a super special interview. It's someone that I've wanted to interview for a very long time. She's a constitutional attorney. She grew up in a Democrat household, but she is now a Republican and she is a constitutionalist. And she has been fighting for the Constitution for the past many years. She has a radio show and she has a TV show as well. Please welcome KrisAnne Hall. How are you doing today, KrisAnne Hall?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's an honor to have you on this show. I've been really excited about this. Just been paying attention to you and who you are for a long time now, and I'm just super excited for this interview to talk about the Constitution, talk about the constitutional overreaches that we have seen over these past 2 years, especially with the COVID lockdowns and everything. And before we really get into that, I want to hear about your story, your upbringing, and I'm on your website right now in the About You
Yeah.
page, and it's truly an interesting thing to read, because like it says, you grew up in a Democrat household, and the only thing that was worse than Satan in your household was was Republicans,
Right.
and and so how have you come from a Democrat household, someone who's not a Christian, to where you are today as a Republican, as a constitutionalist, as someone who is trying to fight for our country?
Well, I can tell you that it wasn't an epiphany moment. It was more of a sanctification process, right? And so I was raised in a Democrat household, a union household. So we were raised with a very strong work ethic, and I was raised to be a hard worker and somebody who understood that you have to work for what you get. And so I worked my way through college. I had 3 jobs. I even had student loans, and I got my undergraduate degree in biochemistry and went out to get my first, degreed job. And I got my paycheck, and I looked at my paycheck and I started sort of looking around at my surroundings. I was raised to believe that it's our job to pay our fair share, and it's government's job to help people who are down and out and who need a helping hand, and to be a good neighbor, you help people when they need help.
Mhm.
And that was government's job to do that for you, right? So you pay your taxes, your fair share for the government to help people out who are in bad straits and can't help themselves. So I get my first paycheck and I'm looking at all these taxes coming out of my paycheck. And it made me look around. And I started connecting some dots and realizing I had really worked hard for 4 years, sacrificed a lot, time, resources, luxuries, extras, and then also came out with student loan debt. And I was wondering why. Now I'm looking and I'm seeing that the same people that were on welfare and not working because they were on welfare when I went into college were the same people still on welfare, still just collecting a check. And it wasn't because they couldn't. It was because they made bad choices.
Mhm.
And it occurred to me at that moment, fairness in its true definition is what I was taught, that if you work hard, you get to reap the benefits of that hard work. But the opposite of fairness is working hard and other people reap the benefits of your hard work.
Mhm.
And so that was really my eye opener, the whole fair and taxes, and the fact that I still believe that it's our job to help people who've come across situations through no decisions on their own, and they just need a hand for a moment. Now it's my job through charity, not government's job through forced charity. But you see, fairness is not having the government take money from me to subsidize people who don't want to work, who continue to make poor choices and are in these situations.
Mhm.
And then I had a family and realized, the whole Hillary Clinton thing, it takes a village to raise a child. I really began to understand what that term village means. And it's not what Hillary says. It's not the government, right? Hillary's "it takes a village to raise a child" would have you define the word village as a child, as a government. But in reality, village is the family, right? It takes a family to raise a child, because at the end of the day, who that child becomes as an adult is no reflection on the government, but is a direct reflection on me.
Mm.
And then the final transformation process for me was when I gave my life to Christ and I really understood sovereignty, yielding, the proper role of government, the proper understanding of creation, the proper understanding of my rights. My rights don't come from documents. They don't come from laws. They don't come from government. My rights come to me by my Creator. They are individually given to me by the highest power in the universe. And all of this happened over a period of years. And I believe that because I came through this process, that God gave me the opportunity to become settled in a firm foundation. So when the challenge came to me and my family to either stand for what we believe in or to give in and just take a paycheck, we chose to stand for what we believe in and trust God that all the good things will come after that. And that's sort of the shortened, long version of how I am where I am today.
Wow.
I was a hardcore socialist, atheist, eugenicist, evolutionist, and God, through his grace and long suffering and his mercy, brought me through certain life-changing events so that I could be the vessel that he has for me to be today.
That's certainly amazing. And one of the super cool things about God is the way that he, transforms us and he sanctifies us. And that was a long process, I believe, of sanctification, of how
Right.
you came to some of these conclusions just, through living life. And then ultimately you went through the ultimate thing, which is giving your life to Christ, which was amazing.
Right.
One of the cool things that I heard you say is that our rights that we have aren't given to us by the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. Now, those
Right.
things are important. Those things were given to us by God, and they're unalienable rights. And so many people, they forget about our founding documents, and I believe that they are so important. And the founding fathers, they point to this, and Thomas Jefferson points to this, and the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among
Right.
these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And so we
Can I
see
ask you a
this.
question?
Yes, of course.
Where did you read that from?
I read that from archives.gov.
Can you go back and read? I have it memorized. So
Mhm.
I'm just curious. go back and read the part that says that um, about government deriving its powers from the
Okay.
consent of the governed. Read that
Yeah.
sentence for me again.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the
Okay.
consent of the governed.
Okay. Because you skipped over the word just before. And I'm sure it was not, it was just subconsciously, but I just wanted to make sure that they didn't leave that word just out, because it's not surprising to me. I've seen versions of the Declaration of Independence that are altered. They're not correctly reprinted. So it would not have been surprising to me for that word just to come out, to have been left out, because it's such a very, very important word. But that whole section there, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. That section of the Declaration of Independence is so deep, is so rich. It actually teaches us everything we need to know as a foundation to build upon everything else. I have in a class where I teach about the constitutions, the state and local constitutions. I have a class where I teach about the origin of liberty. And we have to really understand what that really means. I mean, number one, that teaches us that our rights don't come from the Constitution. They don't come from government. They come by the nature of our creation, by our creator. They teach us the three of the most essential natural rights, because they come from God. They're not constitutional rights, they're natural rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I have a class that teaches what that phrase pursuit of happiness means. It has a specific meaning held by Thomas Jefferson when he wrote that. But when you read that next sentence, that to secure these rights, these inalienable ones, these natural rights, to secure these natural rights, governments are instituted among men, right? So we create government. All authority in government comes from us. We are not products of government. We are not subjects of government. Government is our product. It is subject to the people. But then you continue and it says, we have that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. This is the litmus test for good government. This is, in that one phrase, all you need to know to determine whether your government is just or unjust. Just government is a government that operates according to your consent, right? So if government is not operating according to your consent, it is an unjust government. Well, then you have to know what you consented to, right? What did you consent to? Well, the good news is this: you live in America. You don't have to guess, and you don't have to wait for the government to tell you, because we are a constitutional republic and our consent is written in our Constitution. So on our Constitution. So anything the federal government that does outside the authorization of the Constitution or contrary to the Constitution is outside our consent and is unjust. Same with your state. Anything your state or local government does that is outside the state constitution authority or contrary to the state constitution authority indicates to you that you are living with an unjust government.
Wow, one of the things that you said, you were talking about how you've seen copies of the Declaration of Independence where they've left out certain words and certain very important words. And I think I probably skipped over it just subconsciously. But one of the things that is a movement in many schools is they're trying to get rid of cursive completely. And I believe, and my grandma is an English teacher, and she believes this as well, that the reason why people are doing this, the reason why there's this push to get rid of it, is so young people my age and younger, cannot understand what the Constitution says, what the Declaration of Independence says, and what our founding documents say. They don't want people to know it. They don't want people to read it. They don't want people to understand it. And so they're going to do whatever they can to make it as hard as possible so people can access these kinds of things, access these documents. And that's a problem. And we see it more and more
Yeah,
every day that people are uneducated on what the Constitution really says and what the Constitution really means, that these rights shall not be infringed. And well, we saw infringement of those rights in 2020 when the First Amendment was
right.
infringed, when people couldn't go to church, when people couldn't speak freely how they wished. They're being infringed currently with the Second Amendment, with red flag laws and gun restrictions that 10 or 15 Republican senators have gone for, and the rest of the Democrat senators are going for. This is a problem that we need to address
Right.
right now and as soon as possible, and there needs to be change. Right now in
Right.
Oklahoma, there are primary elections, and Jackson Lawmeyer is running against James Langford for United States Senate. And man, I hope to God that James Langford loses, because he is a rhino. He's a rhino guy, and he doesn't care about our constitutional liberties. He doesn't care about the Second Amendment. He doesn't care about this. He can say that he's a Republican all you want, but when your voting record doesn't go with that, that's a problem. And we need to vote anyone
Right.
and everyone out who is not for the Constitution.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The problem that we have, and I'll just give it to you the way I teach it. We have online classes at libertyfirstsociety.com where we teach all these things. And we've been given a gift of taking these issues that most people believe are complex, and we're able to break them down into smaller pieces and in very obvious but very instructive pieces. And we have students that are middle school, high school students at libertyfirstsociety.com. And we also have groups at law schools that are students of ours at libertyfirstsociety.com, because they understand now that what they're learning in law school isn't actually the truth about the Constitution. So we're bringing out college students now through the program at libertyfirstsociety.com that actually understand the Constitution as you and I are discussing it. And that's where things are going to really, really change, by impacting our middle school, high school, colleges, law students who will be the judges, who will be the lawyers, who will be our representatives in government, who will actually have a foundational understanding of the Constitution as it was meant to be, and not now how it's rewritten. Samuel Adams said it this way: no people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. He said, on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. And so we have to understand that education is the key to making lasting societal changes. The Marxists and the socialists, they got that. They started their changes in the mid 1800s. And it's since the mid 1800s that has brought us to where we are today. So we have to be investors in education for the same long goal that the Marxists and the socialists had. And we have to be educating each other. Taking out the cursive writing out of the schools is really a big deal. It's not just simply about not having people have access to these documents. It's about limiting their access to only what is produced by those who want to teach. So if you eliminate the ability to read the original text documents, then you can be presented with documents in an easier form to read that are altered, that are errant, and that teach us the wrong things about government. And our government education system in America, which has unfortunately bled over into our Christian schools, over into our private schools, and over into some of even our homeschool curriculums that actually teach the wrong things about government.
Wow, that what you just said there is just so profound. The opposition of education is indoctrination. And what
Right,
we're seeing in the schools currently is indoctrination. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do on my podcast is run for school board, become a
right,
teacher, and do what you can to work around the curriculums and teach people the truth. Stop
right.
stop cowering down to this curriculum and to the evil school boards and to the principals and everything, and tell the truth. What we
Yeah, we
see
need
all.
teachers that will do that. I teach all over the country. People invite me to come and teach. I teach in government schools because there are teachers, K through 12 public schools, teachers in public universities who realize they have the autonomy to bring in a guest speaker. And so they bring me in to teach in their classrooms what their textbooks are missing about the truth. And sometimes I even end up teaching in correction of the textbooks. So we need our teachers to know, we need our parents to know that the teachers do have the ability to bring in guest speakers to teach the classrooms. I've had principals bring me in and teach the entire student body in an assembly. And it's just amazing how impactful this education is, how empowering and inspirational it is.
Wow, that's truly. I didn't even know you could bring in guest speakers in such a way. I knew that guest speakers, especially at my school, have been allowed, but I go to a private Christian school where we're taught the Constitution. We're taught things like the Holocaust. We're taught history. And one of the things that people don't understand or know about the United States history, and they'll talk about the history of racism and of slavery all the time. One of the things that no one is taught that I've really ever met or observed is the fact that the founding fathers and the people who were signing the Constitution, they were trying to figure out what to do about slavery, and they were wanting to get rid of it. Ultimately, it didn't happen because they thought it was gonna just end itself and that it would die out. Unfortunately, it didn't. But no one's talking about that. Everyone's talking about the
Yeah.
fact that, well, this founding father had slaves, so he was racist, or this, that, and the other. Ultimately, what was going on is they wanted to end slavery, and no one
Yeah,
is
we
taught
actually
that.
have a class at libertyfirstsociety.com that my husband and I teach together called Slavery and the American Founders, where we actually show you their words, show you how the Constitution itself actually did end slavery in America. The slavery in America was ended through the creation of our constitutional republic. It was politicians who prolonged slavery beyond its end date.
Mm.
And we also teach some misunderstood truths about the minorities in America. Most Americans today believe that America was built what they call on the back of slavery, that there were no free Black people until Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And that is such a evil deception because there were so many women, African American men who were free, who were business owners, who were entrepreneurs, who were philanthropists, who were soldiers and heroes in battle. Even before the 1800s, there were people, African Americans were voting prior to the 15th Amendment. African Americans were holding office prior to the 15th Amendment. Now, I don't, because somebody's going to come along and say, well, KrisAnne Hall is a slavery denier. I am not a slavery denier. I understand the slavery that existed in America. As you said, unfortunately, much longer than it needed to or it was intended to. Our founders did everything they could to end slavery, but we had politicians who were not following the Constitution, who were not following the principles of the liberties of the people as established in our foundation, that continued this practice. And then, but we have to also understand, if we're going to teach history and we only teach the slavery side of history, we're teaching deception. And we're denying so many people the honor and the recognition that they're due. For example, the first man to voluntarily give his life for our independence from Great Britain, the first free man to voluntarily give his life by standing up for our liberty against Great Britain, was a freed slave by the name of KrisAnnes. He was a free African American man who stood up for you and me, who was honored in his day. As a matter of fact, this is the Boston Massacre. He was murdered by the British regular troops, and he was given a funeral. And at the funeral, the Boston Globe at that time documented that KrisAnnes' funeral had the most attendance that they had ever seen in Boston historically. Over 10,000 people came to honor KrisAnnes and the sacrifice that he made. Wentworth Cheswell was the first African-American mayor in 1768. And he was a writer during Paul Revere's ride to let the people know that the British regulars were coming. He was one of the riders. And so we have to understand there's a whole segment of our history that is completely wiped out of our curriculum. And the only purpose in doing that is to teach a deception to our young people, to alienate an entire population of people into believing that America was not designed for them, that the Constitution was created to keep them imprisoned, and that we had a bad Constitution, so we need to change it.
I was at the beginning of April, I went to Washington, D.C. on my senior trip with my senior class. And one of the things that we did was we went to the African American History Museum. Well, unfortunately, that museum is very anti-white and anti-white history. And so
I
they
bet
have this.
KrisAnnes wasn't in there.
No, they weren't. I didn't even see that. I looked at a lot of what they had in there. I didn't see that name. I actually hadn't even heard of that name until just now.
I know.
But they were very, very anti-white, very anti founding fathers, very anti-constitution, and even part of it was anti-Abraham Lincoln because because of some of the things that they disagree with what he said. This is a problem because people are being indoctrinated. It's right in the middle of Washington, D.C., just a few minutes away, walk a few minutes away from the Capitol building. And so we got to go and meet Senator Roy Blunt because the former superintendent of my school was very good friends with Roy Blunt before he passed away. And so we got to meet with him. And one of the things that Senator Blunt was talking about constantly was talking about the peaceful transition of power. He was very anti-President Trump. I could just tell from the way that he was saying things.
Yeah.
Our Constitution has been trampled on. Our liberties have been trampled on, especially on January 6th, with people, they are not getting the fair, speedy trial that is promised to us, promised to them in the Constitution. What do we do about this, especially with the January 6th thing, when the Constitution is clearly being trampled on right before our eyes?
Well, the problem with what is happening today with the unlawful detention of the people involved in January 6th actually began in 2001 when George W. Bush pushed forward the Patriot Act. And in reality, it was a Republican House and Senate majority that pushed through the Patriot Act that allowed for indefinite detention of Americans without any due process whatsoever. Now, the Patriot Act provisions were supposed to sunset when George W. Bush left office. However, every Congress, both House and the Senate, has unconstitutionally continued these unconstitutional acts since 2001. And it's really, really terrible, because what has happened is, I mean, we were fighting this hard. We've been fighting this hard since 2010. I was not in the position that I am in educating and involving in educating other people to be involved until 2010. But from that time forward, we have been working incredibly hard to get people to understand the evils of this indefinite detention. The politicians told us, the Republican politicians told us back in 2011, 2012, that, oh, this will never be used on Americans. This is just for Al-Qaeda terrorists. And I kept reading to these politicians the very language in the bill that allowed them to do exactly what we're seeing them do today. And so if we really want justice for these people and for everybody in America, as we have wicked government in office, we need to remove these provisions of indefinite detention. And we as a people need to really, really grasp a hold of the principle that we cannot trade these essential liberties for a cause of national security. So many Republicans, so many conservatives believed that these provisions were necessary for national security, and now they're being used against us.
It's it's funny that they call it the Patriot Act, because it's now turned into anything but patriotic.
Well, that's how that works. You know, I don't know if you had to read the book George Orwell's 1984, but it may be science fiction, but Orwell was a student of human nature, and he was a student of history. So he knew exactly how governments manipulate, and that's how he did that. Same with Animal Farm. You know, all you have to do is redefine terms and steal the language, and then you can manipulate people into buying into things that they would normally hate. I mean, who would pass a bill that says suspension of the Fourth Amendment and indefinite detention of people? You know, nobody's going to pass a bill that sounds like that. So they have to rename it.
That it's really, they've renamed all of these founding principles, and they've redefined them to whatever they. You just mentioned the George Orwell 1984. I haven't read it, but when the Ministry of Truth came out from Joe Biden and whatever, that's very, very reminiscent with George Orwell's 1984. You know, I don't call Democrats anymore. I don't. I just don't. I call them communist socialists, like my friend Doug Billings does as well, because that is what American Democratic Party has turned into. They have turned into a fusion of communists and socialists, and they're trying to create this new agenda and push forth this new agenda, which has things such as, you know, teaching sexual deviance to children. And we can see that very, very clearly just recently, especially with the drag queen story hours. And I saw a meme that Jackson Lawmeyer posted on his Instagram, and it was a picture that was taken at one of these drag queen things. It was a drag queen in her underwear, in his underwear, whatever, and it was a child about 6 years old or younger, and they were putting money, a dollar bill, in the underwear, and the parents were in the background laughing and smiling and taking pictures. That's what we see. And so the Millstone Act is something that he wants to put forth when he becomes a United States senator, which will ban that and make it highly illegal for those kinds of things to happen.
This is really what we're seeing is an abdication of parental responsibility, really. This is something that the parents have to be accountable to their children. And if parents, it's really an immorality in parents that is driving this. And how do we expect parents to have a morality in raising their children when those same parents were brought up through an education system that taught them this was the definition of morality, right? That taught them that this is acceptable behavior, that taught them that life is not to be treasured, that taught them that God makes mistakes and it's up to us to correct them, that we are not fearfully and wonderfully made. I am not in favor of government schools teaching the Bible. I'm not in favor of government schools teaching religion of any sort. I mean, look what they've done to math. What do you think the government schools would do if they were in charge of teaching the Bible? It would be terrible. It would be horrible. But what we as a people need to know is that families have to teach this in their homes. And unfortunately, I've had way too many pastors who aren't teaching the Bible anymore, that are teaching that this stuff is okay, and that even inviting it into the churches. And so if we don't have churches that are teaching the Bible, if we don't have families who are teaching the Bibles in the households, it is certainly not the job of government to do that.
No, certainly right. Matthew 18, chapter 18, verse 6 says, if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. And that's what we're seeing right before our eyes. They are offending these little ones. They are teaching them these sexual deviances. And the parents have, just fallen away. And the
Yeah,
reason for that is because the churches have fallen away as well. that that
absolutely.
that as the church goes, so goes the family. As the family goes, so goes the nation. Well, the
Yes,
nation is going away because the family's going away, because the church is going away, because pastors won't stand up, speak out, and say the truth of what
right,
God's word says. That is a
right.
problem, and it needs to be addressed, and pastors needs to start standing up and telling the truth about anything and everything that we're seeing in today's society. But sadly and unfortunately, and especially for their souls, uh, uh,
Right.
that's a
You know, it's
problem
interesting that
for
scripture,
America.
some people would take that and say that that scripture was advocating capital punishment, but that's absolutely not the truth. That scripture doesn't have anything to do with government at all. It doesn't have anything to do with laws. It has to do with the condemnation of God at judgment. And it also has to do with understanding the God standard of morality and the precious nature of life and the precious and delicate fragile nature of the children. And so we have to understand that laws don't stop crimes. We don't need more laws. What we need are societies that are teaching these principles. We, like you said, we need churches that are teaching these principles, because in reality, the only thing that will alter this behavior in the parents is the power of the indwelling Holy Spirit.
Mhm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've been talking a lot about, the bad that's going on, and the bad that we see all the time. But right behind me, I have this thing. It says, "In God We Trust," which is the United States national motto. And ultimately, even though we see all of this bad going on in the world, and even though we see the sexual deviance being taught to children, even though we see these creation of racial offenses, and people just spewing hate, ultimately we can look at this motto and see truth. In God we trust. In God
Absolutely.
we entrust our future to, and we can have hope for the future of the United States of America. And ultimately, if the communist socialists win, and if everything happens that we don't want to happen, God wins. God has a plan set in place, and He knows what He is doing. And while this is happening, and while what we are seeing goes on, we need to fight back against that until Jesus returns.
Yeah, absolutely. In God we trust is not a permission slip to sit and wait for the rapture. In God we trust is really a call to action, right? It's to say, hey, I will fight for the gifts of God. I will fight for liberty. I will fight for life. I will fight for all the rights that have been bestowed upon me, those unalienable rights by the nature of my creation, because I trust God will empower me, will give me the wisdom that I need, and that victory will come one way or the other for me because I fought in His name. And we have so many ways to resist and to fight these wicked deceptions. We actually have a documentary. I don't know if you've seen my documentary yet. It's called Non-Compliant. You can find it at noncompliantmovie.com. It will teach you and train you on the most successful, the most powerful, the most effective, peaceful means of resisting and changing wicked government. It has been seen all over the world by millions of people, and we are so happy to have that documentary Non-Compliant at Non-Compliant Movie out there to help train up people, because as you said, God told us occupy until he comes. That word occupy is not about sitting in a pew for an hour on Sunday. That word occupy means to be at work and to be in work for God until he comes. We are not to be that generation where Jesus was worried when he said, will there be faith when I come back? We are to be that generation that says we are who we are.
That's exactly right. One of the things that I want to address before we end this episode is the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and so we've talked about the indoctrination of the United States of America just recently, and we can see that so loud and clear with the fact that people don't even know what versus Wade actually implies. People are saying all over the place, like my abortion rights have been taken away, my autonomy rights have been taken away. That's not true at all. It sends it back
No,
to the states. You can go to California and get as many abortions as you want. I'm
right.
sorry if it comes to that, and ultimately you'll feel guilty for the rest of your life for doing that. That's the story of countless people, but people don't understand really what Roe versus Wade entails. And I think it's great for the future of the United States of America. I think that it's a blessing from God that it was able to be overturned. People are saying that this is for the white cisgender, male agenda being upheld or whatever. That's a bunch of nonsense and bull crap. There was a black man who voted against it, and there was a white woman who voted against it. This whole cisgender male thing, I'm tired of hearing that from anyone and everyone who says that. I automatically just discount them as uneducated and kind of stupid, to be honest.
Well, in reality, it is the great deception that has fallen across the world. These people, they know not what they do. They don't know what they don't know. And they are products of an indoctrination system that has been indoctrinating the people of America since the mid 1800s. I mean, I think about it from the perspective of proper government. We stopped teaching the proper role of government, the proper operation of government in 1833. So every living human being in America who came up through the American education system at best has a tainted view of what government's supposed to do and what it's not supposed to do, unless, like me, they went through and read the original documents and came to their understanding themselves. Our textbooks do not teach American history. They do not teach government, and they do not teach Constitution accurately in any way, shape, or form. And most of the time, they're not just simply inaccurate, they're teaching lies.
Mm.
And so we have to understand the deception that has fallen across the people. Maybe I'm a little bit more sympathetic because remember, I was a hardcore socialist. I was an atheist. I was a eugenicist. So I supported abortion. But I also understand that I did that because I was trained to do that. And by the grace of God, I was able to see the light of truth and to understand, the errors in that. But, the Dobbs decision, which overturned the Roe and Casey, is really an amazing opinion in the fact that it overturned and the Supreme Court's understanding of what is a state issue and what is not a state issue and what exactly is a right and what exactly is not a right. So this decision is much larger than abortion. Abortion is a big deal, and it is a huge deal. So when I tell you that it's even larger than that, we should be very encouraged by what the Supreme Court did in the Dobbs opinion. But you see, you're exactly right. Dobbs did not change anything in America about abortion. It just said that the states have the right to decide whether abortions will be legal or not, putting it into the hands of the people. So if you want to have an abortion, and your state allows it, then nothing changes. If you don't want to have an abortion and your state allows it, you now have a couple choices. You can work to change the laws of your state, or you can move to a state that best reflects your principles. Same with if you want to have an abortion and you are not living in a state that allow that, or you're not, or if you're living in a state that restricts abortion, then you go to another state and you have that done, or you work to change the laws in your state. But this is the way government is supposed to work in America. The power, the majority, and the vastness of power in government is supposed to be resting with the people at the state and local levels.
That's exactly right. You mentioned this, the great falling away, and there's an apostasy that we can very clearly see in today's day and age. And First Timothy chapter 4 verses 1 and 2, it says, but the Spirit explicitly says that in later times some will fall away from their faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons, by means of hypocrisy of liars, seared in their own conscience as with a branding iron, men who forbid marriage and advocate abstaining from foods which God has created to be gratefully shared by those who believe and know the truth. And so we see this falling away, and we see really all over the place, not only in America, but everywhere else as well, that people are being seared. Their brains are being seared with a hot iron, um,
Yeah.
because they've been
You
in
do
it
know
constantly.
that scripture is not referring to law people. That scripture is actually referring to the people in the church.
Right.
And that's what we have been seeing in the last 2 years. We've been
Hmm.
seeing God sifting the true believers from those who just operate based on empty profession.
That's
And
exactly right.
it's going to happen more. And we as believers need to really pay attention so that we can identify in these last days who's with us and who's not.
That's exactly right, and I think it's a Hebrews chapter 6 is probably one of the most debated scriptures, in the whole Bible, talking about your salvation. I believe that this goes exactly in line with Hebrews chapter 6, and basically, what Hebrews chapter 6, in my opinion, and from my understanding of that text, is that people can forfeit their salvation if they no longer confess Jesus, and if they no longer believe in him as Lord. And I believe that's what's happening today in the United States of America and all over the place. People are forfeiting their salvation, and they're going towards doctrines of demons, and they're being heavily, heavily deceived. And it's sad.
It is a very sad thing, but we we know that God's really good at being God, and we know that we have certain marching orders to love our neighbor as ourselves and to love our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength. And we are to make sure that we are in the business of working toward for the kingdom until his return. Part of that working for the kingdom has to be working in the world to maintain, to secure, to defend, to build that wall to help secure the rights of the people. You see, so that we can continue in his work. We we abandon and we abdicate our rights, then guess what? You're not going to have freedom of speech to speak the gospel. You're not going to have freedom to peaceably assemble in your churches. And these kind of things are what should motivate us to keep us working till Christ comes.
That's exactly right. And before we end this, I'm just gonna, say thank you for doing what you're doing, fighting for constitutional liberty, and for educating people on the Constitution, on the Bible, on the history of the United States of America. And I'm going to point people back to this: in God we trust. In God we trust for the future of our nation, for the future of this world, for the future of eternity. In God we
Amen.
trust. KrisAnne, please, man, just thank you so much
Thank you.
for being on this episode, and taking your time to talking about with my audience about this. It's really truly an honor to have you on and to share you with my audience.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's really been a pleasure to be here. I just want to remind everybody if they want to learn more, they can go to libertyfirstsociety.com. Libertyfirstsociety.com is where we do online training, learn at your own pace. And Liberty First Society is designed to be simple enough so that the sixth grader can understand, but then also uh, deep enough and with great enough detail that the serious scholar will also learn. And then noncompliantmovie.com is where you can watch our nonprofit documentary. It's just 82 minutes and it is life changing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much once again for being on this episode.
Thank
And
you.
listeners, thank you for taking your time to listen. God bless you all and goodbye.
Bye, guys.
I called General Flynn. I said, General Flynn, I feel like God wants us to team up to do a Reopen America tour and we get people back to God. And he says, I know. I'm going, you know?
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights when we did this.
I believe America is supposed to be that shining city on the hill, the beacon of freedom.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction.
You gotta make sure you tell me the full thing.
These vaccines are zero liability.
There's so much fake information.
It's the David and Goliath thing.
Their agenda is not God's agenda.
Why will the churches not stand up?
I'm trying to save America. I believe we're in the greatest revival in history.